Alright, so this week's video is drawing our inspiration from Hollywood. I'm going to create the Spider-Man 3 graphic you've probably seen in the recent advertisements, where it's a close-up of his suit and kind of shows a spider web with an interesting fabric pattern in there. And that's what we're going to do here. But first off, to do this, well, just so you know how I'm working, I'm going to image size. You can see that I'm working at a 10 by 7.5 at 125 dpi. A lot of the settings that I'm going to be applying throughout this will vary depending on the size of your file. So you can kind of guess based on what size I'm working on here how you might go approach doing it to a higher res or even a lower res file. But that's where I'm working from. So to start, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to fill that layer with a neutral 50% gray by pressing Shift Delete. Bring up my fill dialog here and we'll make sure we got 50% gray. Then go under Filter to Noise. Add noise. And I'm going to use 100% Gaussian monochromatic, so hit OK. Then go under Filter again. This time we're going to go to Blur, Blur. I'm going to press Command F, Control F to reapply that. Then go under Filter to Sketch and go to Halftone Pattern. And we will get this big window here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and leave the size to 1, contrast set to 1, and leave my pattern type to line. And you can see the effect we're getting right there. I'm going to hit OK. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to go under the Edit menu, go to Fade, Halftone Pattern. Now Fade is only available immediately after you apply a filter, so if you go off and do another step, you will not be able to get to the Fade option. So inside Fade, I'm going to change the mode here to Linear Burn. I'm going to drop the opacity down to 50%. And you can see that gives us a pretty interesting texture there. Now, I'm going to turn this layer off, and we'll get back to it in just a minute. I'm going to create the next part of this. I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm going to go down here and get my Shape tool. In the Shape option or Shape selections here, I want to select this Polygon tool here. And make sure that we are set to 6 sides, right up here in the options. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and just click and drag to the left, and it will draw a shape because I want the top and bottom lines to be straight across like that. Now, draws it as a path, so I'm going to go ahead and press Command Enter, Control Enter to load it as a selection, and making sure we're on an empty new layer, I'm going to fill that with my black color, which is set as my background, so I'm going to press Command Delete or Control Backspace. Now, with that still selected, in fact, let's move and zoom in here a little bit so we can see what's going on. So this object is still selected. I'm going to hold down my Option Command or Alt Control, which, gotta make sure we have our Move tool active. Option Command or Alt Control, and that'll allow me to drag a duplicate, but I'm going to hold down the Shift key so I can drag it straight down, right beneath it, and put a little bit of space between those objects. Then I will deselect by pressing Command D. Now, I'm going to load the selection of both of those objects simply by command clicking on the layer, control clicking on it. Then, holding Option Command down again, we're going to drag a duplicate of both of these objects right over until it's offset like that. And then we'll do that again by dragging it right over here like that. And I'm just eyeballing the spacing in between these objects, so it's not that critical how evenly they're spaced apart. So I'll just deselect that. Now we're going to generate a pattern out of this. I'm going to bring up my rulers by pressing Command or Control R. Now I'm going to drag a path out of the rulers. First one right over here to this corner so it lines up with these corners, these side corners of this shape. And drag another path out to where it lines up with the corners of these objects here. And drag a path in from the top here so it lines up right on the very top of this middle object here. I'm going to drag another path down from the top so it lines up with the very top of this object right here. So now this area inside of here is going to be my repeating pattern. So I'm going to take my rectangular selection tool and draw a selection in that area. Then simply go under the Edit menu and choose Define Pattern. And that will define that pattern. So I'm going to turn off, I'm going to deselect that, clear the guides, turn off that shape. I'm not going to delete it, I'm just simply turning it off for now. Now, I'm going to go into the Channels palette. There's my previous patterns, but we're going to load our own. So in the Channels palette, I'm going to go ahead and load or create a new alpha channel. And by default, it will be filled with black. So I'm going to bring up my fill dialog while active on this alpha channel by pressing Shift Delete. And under the Use menu, I'm going to go to Pattern. And there is that pattern we just created. So make sure that's selected, mode to normal, 100% opacity, hit OK. So there's that pattern we created. Now the white area is exactly what I want to use in my image, and since this is an alpha channel and that area is white, it will be my active selection. So simply holding down my Command or Control key, pressing on that alpha channel loads that area as a selection. I'm going to reactivate my composite channels, go back to my layers. We're going to go back to that original texture we created. So highlight that layer and then turn it on. And with the selection active, I'm going to copy that area to its own layer by pressing Command J. So if I turn on that original texture, there's that selected area of that texture on its own layer. We'll get the texture behind it. To make it visible, I'm simply going to change the blending mode to multiply. Drop it down to about 50%. Now, one more thing I wanted to do to this texture here is go under Filter, go under Blur, and go to Motion Blur. And we'll give it like maybe a 10 pixel motion blur, so it's not so harsh in there. So that pretty much completes the fabric texture. Actually, let's just go back to this little shape here. Let's apply a small blur to it so it's not so detailed. Now, we've got to create the web effect. Well, to do that, we're going to jump over to Illustrator. Get an Illustrator document here. I'm going to go into my shape tools here. I want to get the rounded rectangular tool. And I'm just going to hold down my Shift key to draw a proportional square shape there. Not quite that big. I'm looking at my size over here. I actually want it to be around 160. And that size is, of course, determined based on the size file I'm working on in Photoshop. So yours will probably vary, of course, depending on what size file you're working in. So there's that shape. I'm going to hold down my Option Command key so I can drag a duplicate. But I'm also going to hold down the Shift key so it constrains my left to right movement. I'm just going to move a duplicate over so there's a little bit of space in between those objects, like that. Now, I'm going to repeat that by pressing Command D on my keyboard. So I want 6 duplicates over there. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good. Now, I'm going to drag and select all of those objects and do that same transformation by holding down the Option Command and the Shift key, dragging, and then dragging a duplicate right beneath that. It's a duplicate of all those objects. And again, pressing Command D will repeat that. Let's do that a couple times. And one more. Now, got that grid. I'm going to group it. I'm going to select all these by dragging and selecting the entire group and then pressing Command G to group it together. Here's where it gets interesting. I'm going to go over here and get the Warp tool. Yes, Illustrator has a Warp tool. And the only thing I really need to change here is the intensity. I want it, by default, it comes up as 50. So just make sure you change it to 30. And for the Simplify, I want to leave that setting to 5 right here. So if I hit Reset and go back to the default, you see that they go to 50%. So I want to change the intensity to 30 and the Simplify to 5. And hit OK. Now, to resize this tool, I want to make it so the tool is actually about the size between this point and this point. So inside that, if you hold down the Option key and just drag out, you can see that it will resize. To resize it proportionally, you can simply hold down the Shift key as well, but I don't need to do that, so I'm just going to draw this out right about there. Now, starting at the very top here, I'm going to hold my Shift key down and just paint downward. Let the Shift key go. Click once up here again, hold the Shift key downward. And we'll do that for each line. Oop, got a little crazy there. Each line of this graphic. Just like that. Now, I'm going to go and select all those shapes, copy it to my clipboard. Now we're going to go back to our Photoshop document, right inside here. And I'm going to Option Command minus key to zoom out within the window here so we can get a view of everything that's going on. I'm going to press Command V to paste that, and it's going to give me this dialog asking me how I want to paste it. I do want to paste it as a path. So path is selected, hit OK. There's that shape. I'm going to press Command T to bring up free transform and kind of scale this in just a little bit. just like that. And as I did before with the shape, I'm going to load it as a selection by pressing Command Enter, Control Enter. Zoom back in here a little bit. Now, it's the area here that is selected, but I want the outer area to be selected. So I simply need to invert the selection by pressing Shift Command I. And that will select this area in here, not the inside of the shapes. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to press Shift Delete to bring up my fill dialog, and we're going to go to 50% gray. And we'll hit OK. Then we'll deselect. Now, we're almost there. I'm going to double click on this layer, bring up the layer styles. I'm going to activate bevel and emboss. I'm going to turn off use global light. I'm going to change the gloss contour to this second one, second row, second one in here. And you can move the direction of the light just a little bit, just to give it a little bit more interest. Then also I'm going to activate satin. And I'm going to change the color. If you click on this little swatch, you'll bring up the color picker. I'm just going to give it a lighter color, almost closer to white. And then we'll hit OK. Then I'm going to change the blending mode of that to overlay. Then lastly, I'm going to change the contour to the same one we used on the bevel, which is this one right here. And we'll just kind of, you can toy around with the size a little bit. You can see that the effect we're getting in there. Then lastly, I'm going to activate a drop shadow. And we can go in here and just move that drop shadow. Click and just move it. Increase that size a little bit. So that pretty much is it. Hit OK. Now, all I need to do now, zoom out. I'm going to bring up my free transform on this layer. Control click and go to warp. Then, simply going to push corners of these out of frame. And we'll just kind of manipulate this till we kind of get a shape similar to the one we saw in the graphic that we've seen on the... It's kind of shaping out the chest of Spider-Man and everything, so something about like that. And we'll do the exact same thing to that pattern that we created. Activate that layer, bring up free transform, control or right click on there to bring up the menu and go to warp. And we will manipulate this shape as well, just so it kind of follows the contour of his chest in a way. And we'll bring that out here. Manipulate that around like that. Alright, so almost there. One last thing I need to do is create a new layer. Let me get my gradient tool, and I want to go up to the gradient picker, gradient editor, make sure that we got this first icon selected, so it's going straight from black or white to black, and make sure we're using a radial gradient, which is the second icon right up here. And from the center, or roughly the center right about here, I'm just going to drag a gradient out. Now this is on its own layer, so I created a new layer and bit that gradient on there. I'm going to change the blending mode of this to multiply. Then I'm going to duplicate that layer. And so I have two layers of this gradient. This one that's right above the web, I'm actually going to enclose that in a clipping group. So I'll hold down my Option key and clip that inside there, and change its blending mode to overlay. Will give me a highlighted effect on that webbing. We'll activate that other one, and there we pretty much have it. All I really got to do now is drop in some text that I've already created, which is, boom. It's not Spider-Man 3, it's CS3. So, there you have it. Really quick Spider-Man effect, all right within Photoshop, with a little bit of Illustrator thrown in.